Welcome back to the show. It's January 28th. Please subscribe, like the video, share with your friends and family, comment if you wish, questions. I want to touch base on inflation and the price level as measured by the Consumer Price Index and Donald Trump's new time here in the White House. The left-leaning media, at least, has been harping for the past few days on the fact that Donald Trump hasn't yet brought down the price of goods and services, and more importantly, the price of food. As Donald Trump is wont to do, he's an exaggerator. I'll bring prices down on my first day. I'll end the Ukraine-Russia war on my first day. Of course, these things will not happen. They have not happened. And when it comes to Consumer Price Index and prices or the price level, there's no chance that Donald Trump can bring down the price of eggs or the price of beef or the price of insurance or the price of home construction and the price of cars in a few days and weeks. It's just not possible. And what you may recall from your college years, Economics 101, in the immediate short run, the aggregate supply curve is horizontal, independent of output, which means prices cannot fall in the immediate short run, so days and weeks. And then we get into the short run, so weeks, months, and a handful of years, we have an upward sloping aggregate supply curve. In the long run, we have a vertical aggregate supply curve at full output levels. But the point is, in the very near term, prices are what we call sticky downwards. And they're sticky downwards for a few reasons. But before we get into that, let's just take a look at some charts that reveal the truth about consumer prices. So we'll start with the Consumer Price Index as a whole from 1947 till today. And you can see on the screen that is a constant move higher. We have a couple of instances where you can see graphically, you can pause the video here to take a look at the charts, where we've had some drops or some flattening in the increase in the Consumer Price Index. The Consumer Price Index is a basket of the typical goods and services you and I consume on a regular basis. And you see the gray bars on the chart represent recessions. And during those periods of recessions, you can see flattening or in some instances, small declines in the Consumer Price Index. It's very obvious in the 2008, 2009, 2010 Great Recession. You can see an actual drop in the Consumer Price Index. And even in 2020, you see a little drop, but not as pronounced as in 2008, 9, 10. And so we can see the slope of the increase here from 2020 through 2024 has steepened quite a bit. That's the Biden administration juicing inflation. We can also see when we look at CPI for just food, the Consumer Price Index for just food, again, going back to 1947. Again, very few instances of the Consumer Price Index for food actually falling. In fact, you're hard pressed to find one. Again, during recessions, we'll see some flattening. That is to say, year over year, no change. But even in the 2008, 9, 10 recession, you can see the Consumer Price Index for food rose. And look at the rate of change in the slope of the curve here when it comes to 2021 to 2024, quite steep. And then lastly, we'll take a look at the Consumer Price Index for energy. And here we see some evidence where the Consumer Price Index for energy falls from time to time. And that's, again, largely related to recessionary pressures. So look at 2000, 2001. You can see, again, 2008, 2009, 2010. You can see the slowdown in the economy during the Obama administration in 2013, 14, 15. You can see a drop in 2020. Okay, so obviously that's highly related to the drop in output and therefore the drop in demand for energy. And since energy is a widely traded commodity on the international financial markets and highly speculative, we can see some movements up and down, but very unusual and not very long lasting and not very severe. And so what we find is that there's rare instances of prices actually falling. And again, we have this concept of sticky prices downward. And they're sticky downward for a variety of reasons. Labor contracts, vendor contracts, not enough time to actually make changes in terms of management changes. And so in the immediate short run, there's no chance of dropping prices. And so Donald Trump's getting some trouble here from the left, from politicians in the media, about not already seeing lower egg prices. And again, egg prices are actually higher since he took office on the back of some bird flu raging through the country, which is reducing supply and spiking prices. And what it comes down to is two things. If you want to see lower prices, that is to say, lower prices for a given good, which is a supply and demand model, or lower levels of a consumer price index, which is an aggregate supply, aggregate demand model, there's only two options: an increase in supply or a decrease in demand. So a severe recession can bring down prices, or a shift to the right of the aggregate supply curve or the supply curve can reduce prices or the price level. And let me just show you some graphs to help understand this. So here we have two graphs of the demand curve moving. Okay, we call this a change in demand when the demand curve shifts. Now you can see on the left, we have an increase in demand, which shifts the demand curve from D1 to D2 along the supply curve, which results in higher prices and higher demand. But what we would want, if we want to drop prices, is the graph on the right, where we have a drop in demand when the demand curve moves from D3 to D4. And only in this case can we see a drop in prices, but also a drop in quantity demanded. And so that really isn't what we're after. That's recession. That is definitely one way to reduce prices for a given good, is recession. We look at the supply curve and the demand supply model for the price of a given good. We can see here the only way we're going to get lower prices out of these two graphs is when we get a shift of the supply curve to the right, moving down along the demand curve. That results in lower prices and increased supply. And conversely, if we have a drop in supply on the right-hand side, moving supply curve 3 to supply curve 4, we move up along the demand curve. That results in higher prices and lower supply. That is not what we want. So the target is the graph on the left, for the price of a given good, say eggs or oil or beef. And the only way we can get a shift of the supply curve out into the right that reduces prices and increases supply is a change in resource prices. So think oil. This is something that President Trump is after, trying to reduce the price of oil. A change in technology that reduces the cost of producing a good. The change in the number of sellers, so more suppliers, which would increase supply, which reduces price. We can have a change in taxes and subsidies. So in this case, we want to reduce taxes or increase subsidies. That would shift the supply curve down into the right, dropping prices. Only these things moving in a positive direction for supply, which was just the supply curve to the right, would result in a drop in prices for a given good. Now, we want to talk about aggregate supply and aggregate demand. And so in this case here, again, we'll look at the movement of the demand curve and the movement of the supply curve. You can see here, again, only a recession, a drop in demand, but in this case, we're talking aggregate demand. So now we're talking about the price level for the whole economy, not the price for an individual good. And so if we see a shift to the left of the aggregate demand curve from AD1 to AD2, moving down along the aggregate supply curve, there's a possibility beyond the short run of moving from point A to point C. So if the price level falls, the consumer price index falls, rate of inflation is negative. But more importantly, in the short run, we'd end up at point B because of this concept of sticky prices downward as a result of contracts and obligations by the producer. So AD shifting left reduces the price level, but moves us into recession. And then lastly, we can look at when the aggregate supply curve shifts to the right. Okay, again, notice we're looking at the price level here against real domestic output. So if we get a shift from AS1 to AS2, we can move down the y-axis with the price level falling, inflation rates negative, and increase output. And now in this case, when we look at aggregate supply, aggregate demand, now the only things that can shift the aggregate supply curve out and to the right is if domestic resource prices fall, so the cost of labor falls, or the cost of capital falls, think interest rates, or the cost of land falls, or price of imported goods falls, like oil, and or a appreciation of the US dollar, which makes imports less expensive. We can get a shift to the right of the aggregate supply curve as a result of increased productivity. So workers being more efficient with the capital and labor they have. If productivity rises, we're more efficient. And then lastly, another way we can get the supply curve shifted out to the right is a change in the legal environment. So reductions in taxes, increases in subsidies, reductions in regulation. And these are all things President Trump is working on. This is supply side economics, essentially. So it's only through these two methods, a shift in the aggregate supply curve to the right, which increases output and quantity, or a shift of the aggregate demand curve to the left, which means recession, do we get a drop in the price level, which is what we're after. And so Donald Trump, again, as he wants to do, exaggerates a lot. There's no chance he was ever going to get inflation down in the first day or the first week. But the Trump team is after these determinants, is what we call them, that will help to reduce costs for the producer, shift the aggregate supply curve or the supply curve, depending if we're talking about a given good or the whole economy, to the right to reduce prices and or the price level. So that's the scenario we're in. And I understand the mockery, the comments from the left and the media and politicians. Hey, President Trump, where's your drop in inflation? Well, if his policies are put in place, really at best, a reduction in the rate of inflation approaching zero. Remember that we don't want to get into a situation where we have long extended periods of time of negative rates of inflation, because that can be a doom spiral to the downside. But nonetheless, to the extent we can reduce inflation and possibly reduce the price level, but certainly reduce the prices of some goods within the basket that makes up the consumer price index, President Trump is moving in that direction with the policy he has in mind related to the determinants I just talked to you about, that shift the supply curve to the right. And so that's a little economics 101 for you. But that should calm the nerves of the left. And President Trump and his economic team should get out in front of this and talk about this publicly in the way that I just have. Share this with your friends and family. This is basic econ. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you want to put some questions in the comments related to what I just shared with you. And before I go, I just want to quickly comment. Today, President Trump's press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, had her first press conference and did what President Trump said he was going to do, and that's tell us what was going on with the drones in New Jersey and other states around the country. And here's what Caroline had to say. An update on the New Jersey drones. After research and study, the drones flying over New Jersey in large numbers were authorized to be flown by the FAA for research and various other reasons. Many of these drones are hobbyists and recreational drones that enjoy flying drones. This is not the enemy. That is not the answer that Americans are waiting for. That's not the answer MAGA base was waiting for. I think that's a bunch of BS. It leaves more unanswered questions. What various other reasons? And why are we having so many hobbyists and recreational drones flying around? We got to nip that in the bud right away. I don't want hobbyists and recreational drones flying around my home, over my home. Absolutely not. Privacy laws alone. And so this was a insufficient response, given what he said in the campaign trail, that he'd get to the bottom of this. This is not the end of this question. All right, that's all I have for you right now. Always try to buy American.